Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of TD 202. In this episode, we will learn how to draw simple isometric drawings that consists of isometric circles. Stay tuned. Okay, so these are the drawings that we are going to look at today. We are going to start off with the drawing on the left, which is the simpler drawing of the two. So let's begin. I'm going to draw the simpler part of the shape first, which is the square portion. So in the interest of time, I have drawn the shape. I have not demonstrated the drawing of the shape. If you want to brush up your skills on drawing simple isometric drawings, go ahead and watch the few videos before in this series. So let's go ahead and draw the circle. Okay, so in the first two episodes of TD 202 that illustrated the drawing of isometric circles, I made reference to the fact that whenever you're drawing isometric circles, the first thing that you should do is to draw an isometric square that is equivalent to the diameter of the isometric circle, meaning one side of the square should be equivalent to the diameter. Then you would proceed to divide the square into 4 quadrants or 4 equal parts. In this case, the reverse will be done because, as you can see, if we are to draw the square, we would not know where exactly to position the square. But what we do know is the center of the circle, which would be the center of the square. So in this instance, we will proceed to find the center of the square first, which would essentially provide the dividing lines for the square. So as I can see here, my center lines are 30 millimeters respectively from this point. So I'm going to measure 30 millimeters, which is around halfway. In some drawings, they may not give these measurements, and you would be left to assume that these lines fall in the center. These lines are not necessarily showing the center of the square object, they are just showing the center of the circle. I'll explain why that is. So once I have established the center of the isometric square, I will now proceed to draw the isometric square. Now this is what you should do when you have the center. From the center, since the isometric square should be 36 millimeters in diameter, meaning one side of the isometric square should be 36 millimeters in diameter. By the way, this is the diameter sign. You should measure half of that measurement from the center. So half of 36 is 18. And you are going to do this on all 4 lines branching from the center. So in all 4 directions, that is. Now this is where you have to be very, very careful that you're measuring exactly from the center. And you have to also ensure that you're marking off the points with precision. Okay. Now that I've marked off all the 4 points, I'm going to use these 4 points to create the square. Please note I'm not connecting the 4 points. I am drawing parallel lines to the center lines that were established before. So parallel lines here, parallel lines here, parallel lines here, and another parallel line here. So if you notice, these 2 lines are parallel to this center line. These 2 lines are parallel to this center line. Once you have established the square, normally the next thing to do is to establish the center of the square, or divide the square in 4 quadrants. But if you realize, that has already been done by virtue of establishing the center lines to begin with. So I can skip that step now and move on to constructing my isometric circle within my isometric square. In the last episode, I did just that. This time around, as I mentioned in the last video, you can proceed to draw the top circle first rather than the bottom circle of the cylinder by projecting the lines upwards for the isometric square. And I'm just realizing that I did not establish a height for the cylinder. I'm going to assume a height of 40 millimeters. Once I measure it on both sides, 40, I can transfer measurements to complete this cylinder. This time around, the top circle for the cylinder is not going to clash with the bottom circle, as you can see here. Now for this circle, you have to establish the center, or divide the circle in 4 equal parts. So this is 36. Half of 36 is 18. And then 36. Half of 36 is 18. Now In the last episode I used the A pattern. This time around I'm going to use the V pattern to demonstrate that it doesn't matter which pattern that you use. So I'm going to firstly connect my diagonals, and the diagonals, it should be the longer diagonal that you're using. Then I'm going to draw my V pattern, sorry. Now these 2 points are the points that I'm going to use to draw the isometric circle at the top. I normally like to draw the smaller arcs first, then proceed to draw the larger arcs. Now, when drawing, if you notice these circles are smaller in diameter, or the arcs are smaller in radius rather, which can be difficult to reproduce, especially if your compass is not up to par. This is where the bow compass will excel. Seems like I'm not getting the compass to open as I want it to. The next thing to do is to draw the larger arcs. And for this particular aspect of this drawing, or this portion, you can proceed or review rather the previous video in this video series that will show you how to draw isometric cylinders. Okay, so I am going to proceed to transfer down the measurements, but not before establishing the circle at the base. And I've drawn this line incorrectly. Let me redraw. I'm also going to use the V pattern, just for the sake of uniformity. Now, for this part of the drawing, I am only going to brighten the lower portion of this particular arc, but I still have to ensure that it would touch the upper point. All right, next side. Then I'm going to use the point at the top. And please note, I have no need to brighten the arc, all the arcs rather for the circle. I am only going to brighten the portion that I need. Now I can proceed to brighten the rest of the shape. Now, if you notice before drawing the cylinder on top, I have brightened a portion of the shape beforehand. I am imploring you, if you are just learning, refrain from doing so until you have successfully constructed the drawing, because you may brighten a portion by accident that you may have to erase, which will result in your work being untidy. Now this is the first shape. I am going to draw the second shape. So I'm going to quickly draw the base, which you guys should already know how to construct. So here is my second shape. Well, the portion of the shape that doesn't involve constructing isometric circles. Now, as before, the first thing I'm going to do in this instance, rather than drawing the isometric square, is to establish the center of the circle, which will essentially be the center of the square. And as I've explained before, we cannot draw the square first in this instance due to the fact that we would not have known where exactly the square should be positioned. We can only determine the center of the square by finding the center of the circles as illustrated by the center lines. So for this exercise, this will also be 30. As well. 30. Now, in instances like these, you will be given the distance of the center line from a particular edge. But as I've said before, if you are not given that distance, you must assume that the center line is splitting the object in half. For example, I could have left off this dimension, and you would have to assume that this center line runs through the halfway mark of the object, right? For the other side, it would have to be given. Okay, so I'm going to proceed to draw my center line. So I'm measuring 30 millimeters from either edge, doesn't matter. It's equal, so I can do that. If it wasn't equal, then I would have to choose the edge where the measurement is showing. Then from both edges, I'm going to measure 30 millimeters. Then proceed to draw my center line. Now I'm going to show you something, and this is what you should look out for when you are drawing. I am kind of drawing in a hurry, so as to make this video as short as possible. So in the process of rushing, this line is not going through this point, which it should. This is an isometric square, if you realize, 30 millimeters, 30 millimeters. So any vertical line that is going through the shape would be the diagonal, which means it should touch the top point or the bottom point. And rather, since that is not happening here, this proves to me that my shape is not drawn symmetrically or drawn accurately. Therefore, I may encounter some errors down the line. Now that I've established the circle, the centers, just like the last time, I'm going to find the square that is supposed to surround that center. And since in this instant, the isometric squares that are to be drawn should have a diameter, or one side of the isometric square should have a diameter of 40 millimeters, I'm going to proceed from the center to measure 20 millimeters on either side of the center. So this is, I'm going to do them both circles. So from this circular center, I'm measuring 4 points 20 millimeters away from the center. And I hope you can see my points. Once I've established my points from the center, let me put them a bit brighter so that you can see. I would normally not brighten these points so much as they will affect the drawing, but I want you guys to see them. Now that I've gotten these points, these 2 points will be parallel to the center line, while these 2 points will be parallel to this center line. Please refrain from connecting the points to form the square. So I'm going to parallel line. And since I have the set square in this position, I'm going to go ahead and do these as well. Flip. Okay, now I have one square, I have another square. I can now proceed to draw the patterns. This time around, I'm going to use the N pattern that I was telling you about. So, I'm drawing my diagonals. I can draw them for both. Right? This is drawn incorrectly. And as much as possible when you're drawing, please refrain from drawing double lines. I'm struggling here at the moment because of the lighting. The shadow is blocking my vision. Now you can see the end pattern here. Now these are the 2 points that have been established. I'm going to do the same thing here. Now, in drawing the end pattern, this line will not be necessary. I'm just going to draw it just to make the end. Okay, so now that you have established the end pattern, you are going to proceed to draw the circles. Bear in mind that this circle, you don't need to brighten it, so you can replicate the method that I was showing here. I'm going to proceed to draw the front circle, or the circle that doesn't have the cylinder. I can brighten the entire circle in this instance. And as I said before, you don't have to start with the smaller arcs. You can proceed. So these points that I've established, where the end lines, the lines from the end pattern intersects with the diagonal for the square, you use those for the smaller arcs, and you use the opposite points on the square to draw the larger arcs. So the A pattern really is only established to draw the smaller circles. You don't need the A pattern for the larger arcs. Keep on saying circles, I should say arcs, because there are 4 arcs that are drawn together to form the isometric circle, or the ellipse. Now I've drawn this circle, and there's something that I want to demonstrate, but not before drawing the cylinder at the back. I'm going to leave that for last. And I'm going to proceed to transfer these measurements. Okay, I'm just going to breeze through this because it's the exact method. Okay, so I've almost completely drawn the shape. This height was given. I've just decided that it is 40 millimeters. Now, there's something I want to point out quickly. Now, in drawing a cylinder, if the diameter of the circle is the same as the height of the cylinder, both isometric squares will meet, right? And they will not collide. If the height of the cylinder is larger than the diameter of the circle, there will be a space in between. As in the drawing yesterday, if the height is smaller than the diameter, then will the squares for the cylinder collide. So you can use that as a guide to determine if your drawing is accurate. Now, let's proceed to draw the final circle. Now, we could have gone ahead and projected some lines downwards. Now, this is the depth. Now, because this is the depth of this hole, this circle shares the same diameter as the circle above. So we could have simply projected 2 lines down from the edge of the square and redraw all this mess again. I call it mess because it will look confusing if you are to proceed to draw an entire isometric square, find the center, find the pattern to establish the points. I am going to do something that I'm going to refer to as the transference of points. So I need this arc and probably the next two arcs beside to be transferred. Now, depending on how wide the circle is and how far down and the distance that you have to transfer, it will determine if you need the other two arcs. So let's go with the one that we need. Now, pay attention closely. We used this point to draw this arc. So since this arc is 5 millimeters lower than the arc above, this point that was used to draw this arc must also be transferred 5 millimeters below, right? And you can just open your compass to the same radius that you used to draw the top arc. It's the same arc but lower. However, before you proceed to draw, listen carefully, you have to know where the arc will start and stop. Since it starts here and stops here, these points must also be transferred down. You don't have to measure these points because the arc will touch the lines that you have transferred down. So notice I'm not using the original point, I'm using the point that I've transferred 5 millimeters down. I'm going to start my arc on the lines that are projected, and end it on the other one. So I started on the first line. So if you notice, this line that was projected down, this line that was projected down, they both touch the arc, right? So let me go through that again. I've used this point to draw this arc, and since this arc is 5 millimeters below this arc, all points involved in the arc will be transferred down. The first one, the second one, and the third one. The first point is where the arc starts. The second point is where the arc stops. The third point is where the compass point was when you draw the arc. So this point has to be transferred down 5 millimeters. That's the point that you use the compass. That's the point that you place the compass. The other two, they will work out. So now that I've established my first arc, it's time to establish the other two. Now, the same principle applies. I am going to transfer, this point was used to draw this arc. I'm going to transfer this point downwards. Also this point, because it was used to draw the other arc. I have to measure. Whenever I'm dealing with the compass points, I have to measure. Whenever I'm dealing with the points where the arc starts and stops, I don't have to measure. So now I'm going to open the compass, place it at the new point, then continue the arc. So it's at the new point now that I've established, the 5 millimeters below the original point. And if you notice, it's the same radius. It is set to the same radius that was used to draw the first arc. Now this is the last. So rather than drawing this shape all over again, I've just simply transferred the measurements of the first circle to draw the second circle. Remember, for each circle for the quadrant, you have the point where the compass is placed, the point where the arc starts, the point where the arcs stop. Now, those are the 3 points that I'm transferring for each arc downwards by a milli, not 1 millimeter, sorry, 5 millimeters. So I'm essentially drawing another circle 5 millimeters below. So there you have it. I hope you have grasped the concept or the concepts that were taught in this lesson. Please do watch it thoroughly, share it, like it, and most of all, subscribe to the page for future content. Have a good day.